Let's say you're some medieval king, right, and you have access to an army, and you have a lot of territory you can that is just available and ripe for you to conquer it and whatever and stuff. All right, so how would you make a successful empire? Right? Well, first of all, you have to think about what system of government you're going to implement in this empire that you're trying to construct, right? What would be your type of government? Are you gonna have one guy, a king, a monarchy, a dictator, control everything, or are you gonna distribute the power to like a bunch of, to like a type of a senate, right? A round table of people that can equally decide on how to run that empire and who, like, and then to determine legislation and like whatever and types of economic policies, right? Are you gonna only rely on one guy, or are you gonna distribute everything equally to like a group of people and stuff? And this is like crucial. And, if you will only rely on one guy, if you decide to, pick a monarchy, right, a dictatorship, right, you know, what would be the benefits of that, right? You can say, well, efficient, like everything will become a lot more efficient. Like one guy, there's no like he can just immediately put into effect any type of change, any type of legislation, any type of policy. Let's say your empire or nation is like suffering from some type of social problem, right? This one guy you can go to and say, all right, this, and this, and this. And the other guy would be like, the guy that's running that empire or nation, he can just quickly affect changes. You can say, he can just, all right, here we go. And he can send some group of soldiers to whatever problem that's being like kind of not being taken care of. He can kind of take care of that problem, right? That's kind of the beauty of like a monarchy and a dictatorship, right? One guy can affect change immediately and quickly and efficiently, right? With no hindrance, right? And you can see how that would kind of quickly tackle a lot of social problems, like, that would take forever to change and fix in a democratic system, right? Because in democracies and in democratic systems, right? Social change has to be voted in. It requires a longer, it takes a longer time, right, to kind of affect any type of social change in democracies and democratic nations and stuff. Why is this? It's because democracy, it doesn't allow one person to take control of the entire nation, right? It puts in like this body of, it kind of creates this separate, I don't know, it's like a different, the elections and stuff. It creates some type of process of elimination, right? A criteria, and this guy has to meet this criteria or he gets eliminated, and someone else comes in. It's all determined by voting, but the voters and stuff, they choose which leader they want. Of course, you can say has checks and balances, and so it's beneficial, and this is desirable and stuff. Yeah, but it creates a lot of hindrance, right? It makes social change a little bit harder, right? Because now you have to vote in people that you want to affect the social change, right? Whereas monarchs, dictators, they can just they can, with the snap of their fingers, get any social change affected in quickly, almost immediately, right? There is no hindrance on what they can do and stuff, whereas, in democratic nations and democracies, there's this hindrance, right? Because, it relies on what the voters want, and the democratic process, that you have to like wait for the next elections to kind of come in, and then you can vote, and if you're lucky, your vote might mean something, and you can kind of hope that your ideas about changing your society can kind of come into maybe fruition and existence and whatever. And that's why democracies are a little bit flawed, right? And so what was I trying to kind of bring this all the way back to what I was originally saying? What would be the best type of government to kind of run an empire, a nation? So you can say, well, monarchies and dictators, they can quickly affect social change, right? But there's also a lot of negatives, right? Dictators and monarchs and kings and queens and rulers, absolute rulers, right? They can become quite corrupt. They can become quite megalomaniac-like, right? They can become quite abusive. You can they might not really care about the people they're ruling over and stuff, and that could create a lot of problems. And so, all right, then what will be a better form of government? Then a lot of people just come and say, of course, a democracy. Give the people the power to vote who they want. Give the people the power to vote in leaders that are competent and smart and resourceful. But of course, democracy. it's a fanciful way of kind of saying mob rule. That's what democracy is. You're letting the majority determine how the nation and empire would be run, right? Or about minority groups, right? Minority groups, they don't have any type of voting power. Their votes become worthless, right? Because the mob, largest majority, they get to determine things, right? The smallest minority, their opinions are worthless, right? Their votes are meaningless. So you can see democracy isn't perfect. It's not ideal, right? Of course, it also creates, as I already mentioned, a type of hindrance, right? Because in order to affect social changes in democratic nations, in countries and empires and nations that are democracies, you would have to wait your turn for the next election, and that could take a long time. Then you have to wait for the election results to come in. Then you have to kind of wait on who. The entire democratic process takes almost generations to kind of completely pass by and to come into fruition, right? To complete itself, right? The democratic process is so time-consuming and long. And again, as I earlier mentioned, right? As I mentioned earlier, and you're not supposed to, a monarch, a dictator. Any type of change he wants, he can affect it. If there's some type of social problem, you can go to this dictator and say, "All right, here we go." The dictator, assuming he's not evil, right? You can just come in and send soldiers or some type of army, and you can get rid of that social problem, whatever it is, right? He can use the resources that he has, and he can kind of fund solutions to whatever problem that is that his empire or nation is suffering from. This is why I kind of believe that benevolent monarchs and dictators are a lot better than democracies. And then you can say, well, that's kind of absurd, right? Because dictators and monarchs they become corrupt quite easily, as history has shown. Plenty of evil kings and rulers and emperors, and you can look at the Roman emperors, right? They were super corrupt and stuff. They were waging wars. This should kind of be a clear lesson to not choose this type of government system, right? Monarchs giving one person all the control and power is kind of stupid. But assuming that you can say, well, yes, democracy is a lot better and stuff. But as I kind of already mentioned, democracy's mob rule, right? It's not really all that better. You're just letting the majority of course, you could say that checks and balances everything. People don't want to get abused, and so they'll vote for people that value human rights, that value being good rulers, that value their nation. So this is why democracy is a lot better, because it has a check and balance system. It checks and balances everything and stuff. It makes sure that only competent rulers and people come into power and stuff. Okay, that's true, but the democratic process can again take generations to affect any type of social change. You would have to kind of wait till next election turns up, and then you would have to cast your vote and be lucky that your vote actually means something and stuff. And so it's extremely tricky, but you have to kind of because of the fact that human nature is fundamentally flawed, right? A benevolent dictator, a benevolent monarch is extremely absurd, right? Because human nature is not benevolent, right? Humans are fundamentally corrupt, right? Fundamentally power-driven, fundamentally egocentric and stuff. So, you'd have to I would have to concede and say that, a democracy would be a lot more efficient, not efficient per se, completely, because a dictator can quickly affect changes. Whereas in a democracy, the democratic process takes generations, right? But regardless, a democracy would be a lot more stable in the long run, right? Stability, which is kind of crucial. And so, of course, all right, let's just decide on a democracy then. Or so, what else would your empire need to be successful, right? It would need some type of culture. It would need to be it would need a culture of science, a culture of philosophy, a culture of rationalism. That's you look at the Ottoman Empire, right? The Ottoman Empire was it was just an empire, right? It's like any other empire, but it was stagnating, right? Why is that, right? Look at Russia. Russia was quickly advancing, right? Peter the Great was rapidly modernizing Russia, making it more developed, making it more scientific. That was a massive push that Peter the Great tried to do. It's trying to make Russia more modern, so to speak. When I say modern, I mean more oriented towards secularism and science and philosophy and rationalism, right? As opposed to religion, religion being kind of the main decider for everything, right? He was kind of trying to make it more along the lines of like science has like some more control over like what happens and stuff. It's kind of it helps like determine where that country should go, a nation or whatever. Yeah, so the Ottoman Empire, they were kind of extremely primitive and archaic, right? They had no culture of science, right? They had no culture of philosophy, of rationalism, right? And that's why the Ottoman Empire was quickly crumbling to pieces, right? The Russians were coming after that type of, the Turks in that empire, and they were smashing down on its border walls, right? The only reason the Ottomans even kind of made it out alive, barely, right, is because the other Europeans they didn't like Russia at the same time period, right? So they kept they gave the Turks some some assistance and stuff. That's the only reason the Turkish people are still even in Turkey and Anatolia, right? That's the only reason why Turkey hasn't just been wiped off the map. It's not just an extension of like Russia and Greece and the other Balkan countries. It's because the Europeans were assisting the Turks in that time period because they thought Russia was kind of more of a problem. But regardless, right, the Ottoman Empire, right, didn't have a culture of science, didn't have a culture of philosophy, didn't have a culture of rationalism. So what did this mean? This meant that they couldn't develop anything advanced. Right? They couldn't become more technologically advanced compared to Europe, right? Because technology, you need to kind of value science in order to get like more advanced technology, because you have to kind of think more rationally and stuff, and you have to kind of devise new ways of building stuff and kind of constructing better techniques for weapons and whatever and stuff. That's kind of why that's really the reason why the Ottomans kind of just collapsed. They didn't really have a strong culture of science and philosophy and rationalism. Of course, there were some observatories built, right? I know some of the rulers in the Ottoman Empire, they tried to get some science and philosophy and rationalism going, but there wasn't really that strong of an effort, and that's why that empire is kind of gone. That empire also couldn't industrialize, right? Industrializing is kind of crucial. They couldn't manufacture things properly and stuff, right? And that's kind of another reason why the Ottomans are gone forever, right? Because they couldn't modernize in that way, right? By becoming more industrialized. That's why Europe kind of quickly took control of that type of area. Well, actually, no, it didn't. It did kind of make the Ottoman Empire go away now, right? But yeah, so to kind of move all the way back to what I was originally saying, like, well, what would determine like a successful empire, right? You would have to have a stable form of government, right? So that has to be like this type of government would have to be kind of democratic in nature, right? In some way, right? Giving one person absolute control kind of leads to a lot of corruption, as history has shown, right? Okay, so you would need some type of government that's a little bit democratic, or what else would you need, right? You need to this new empire would have to have some type of culture of science and philosophy and rationalism, right? You'd have to kind of value these things, otherwise this empire that you have is going to stay, it's not going to develop in any meaningful way. You're not going to get any new technologies developed, right? This empire and societies is going to stay like kind of archaic and primitive. What will be the last thing you would need, right? So you need some type of democratic government. You would need like a strong culture of science and philosophy and rationalism, right? What would be the last thing that you would need? The last thing that you would need would be kind of, I would say, it would be, in terms of economics, right? You'd have to have more of it's tricky though, because, capitalism, socialism, communism, there's beneficial elements in all of these different economic systems. I don't believe that, it's only capitalism or it's only socialism or it's only communism, right? There's elements that you can embrace from all of these different systems, right? And of course, a free market allowing people to own their property and stuff like that, you would have to that would have to be something that you would have to encourage and legislate, right? Otherwise, it's going to incentivize people to not care about what they own. It will kind of incentivize a lot of other social problems and stuff, right? You have to give people like some type of authority on their property, on their goods, on the stuff that they buy and sell and stuff. Because, no one wants to feel like they're enslaved, right? They want to actually have some type of sense of ownership, right? So yeah, that would, you'd have to have some type of free market system. Of course, what about healthcare and stuff like that for this new empire? You can it's kind of tricky because socialism is kind of comes into socialism. Public projects, yeah, I could see it depends a lot though on how you would fund these social services. Right? Yeah, it's kind of tricky. I think the economic aspect of this fictional empire is kind of hard to figure out, right? Because capitalism, socialism, and communism, right? These are all kind of there's elements of truth in a lot of these economic systems. It's kind of you'd have to figure out how to implement them in a non-corrupt way.